Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our lifelong learning on December 1st, Modern Love Stories of Jerusalem with our friend Kobe Cooper, who has recorded many videos for us, and he'll be with us later in the year. I do want to say one thing. All of you who have signed up, tomorrow I am going to give you a link where you can watch we're not going to watch the entirety of the videos. It's over an hour, the love stories themselves. But I will give you a link where you can go and watch everything that Kobe has recorded and take your time going through things. We're going to hit some of the highlights. And we'll do that again in our second session in just a couple of months. And then in our third session at the end of let's call it towards the end of the Jewish year, I believe in April or May, we will not meet on a Thursday evening. We'll meet on a Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. And Kobe will actually join us from Israel, where the timing is a little bit different as compared to 2 o'clock in the morning, which it is now for him. So I want to start by introducing myself. I'm Eric Goldberg, as you guys know, one of the rabbis at Shir Me. And I asked our friends who are here, for anybody who might be watching this recorded, to share the last time they were in Jerusalem, and maybe if they so have a particular love story or a connection to love or something that relates to love in Jerusalem. And behind me is a totally nondescript building in Jerusalem, except for one particular fact. When in 1998, in the first year of rabbinic school, a younger, with more hair, Eric Goldberg, moved to Jerusalem and lived in the building behind me here. So on 6 Jabotinsky Street, which was a wonderful place to live. And there, not in the same building, but not super far away, down the street was Hebrew Union College on King David Street, just not too far down the road. And if you went just a little bit further, I happened to meet a very special, wonderful woman in Jerusalem who, luckily enough for me, decided I was pretty okay also. And 1998 started our journey together. And here we are still in 2022, married in 2000. So it makes my life easy to remember how many years I've been married. It makes life very easy. And all along the way have returned to Jerusalem, although very rarely together. We've bumped into each other a couple of times, but for one trip, which Toby was a part of and others at Shir Me were a part of, we did get to go together. So Jerusalem always holds a special place in our heart, although I will say for the posterity of this recording that if we were ever to make Aliyah to Israel, we have both agreed that our time would not be living in Jerusalem. We would live way, way, way in the northern part of Israel, where we could live on a kibbutz or a moshav or somewhere in the mountains. That would be wonderful for us. So I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves a little bit. I'll just kind of go around on my screen. Alan, if you wouldn't mind being the first of our guests.
Okay, I'm Alan Scheinberg. I'm a member of Shir Me, and I've been a member for, I think, 21 years so far. Last time I was in Jerusalem was about, I think it's 6 years ago. I was traveling with Ellie Short and her husband, and Sheldon and Marilyn Halpern, and we went to we were on a Volunteers for Israel mission where we worked on a military base for a couple of weeks, and had an opportunity when I was there to visit with some relatives and spend quite a bit of time with them, which was great. Romantic story. So when the last time I was there with Marilyn, we've traveled Israel. I've traveled there 5 times, but the last time I was with her, we on King David Street stopped in a jewelry store and bought wedding bands that said Ani Ledodi V'Dodi Li, and we still wear them today. So that's my romantic story.
There you go. And Alan, we can say we share something in common, because in between where I'm, the picture behind me now, and the old city, there is a little artist village where right as you get to come into the old city, I don't know if it's even there anymore after the last couple of years and COVID, but that is where Jerry and I got our wedding bands as well. So we have a little bit of a shared experience, which is great. All right, Debbie Stevens, you are next.
Okay, I'm Debbie Stevens. The last time I was in Israel, I think was 1996. It was certainly the mid-90s. Actually, I traveled with Rabbi Eric's parents on a Shir Me trip, and my children were, it was between my daughter's bat mitzvah and my son's bar mitzvah year. So I had been there before, once with my parents, once while I was in college, and this was the third trip, the first one for the other members of my family. So it's been a few years since we've been there. In terms of romance, I don't know. That's a little bit of a stretch. I did meet my husband traveling in a foreign country, but it wasn't Israel. So I got nothing to add for romance. And traveling with your kids, it's not quite so romantic.
That means you'll have to go back perhaps next year when Share Me goes on our congregational adventure, which would be great. Okay. So Mark, you are next.
All right. So last time Mark Luber, Share Me member for about 13 years or so. And the last time I was in Israel was just before Zach was born, so about 14 years ago with Jackie. And my love story is not really one at all, I guess, but when I went right after college, I was dating a girl who from my school, from my college, that was not Jewish, and it was becoming more and more important as we were trying to figure out like what we were doing. It was becoming more important to me, and you know, she didn't really understand Judaism. It's a whole thing. But I thought that if I brought pictures back from Israel that showed her things you know, that were meaningful to me as a Jewish person, that she would somehow like have a connection and it would help us and whatever. And as it turns out, it didn't at all. It didn't mean anything. And so then I met Jackie. Well, I'd met her before, but anyway, started dating Jackie, and then we got married, had 2 kids. So, you know, that's the love story.
There you go. Thank you so much, Mark. Barbara, how about yourself?
I'm Barbara Cohen, and about 15 years ago, Birthright invited early childhood educators, directors, to go to Israel and on a free trip. And I was one of them. It was a wonderful trip. I had never been in Israel before. It was a learning experience. And I think the love came from a skeptical person over here. I didn't think I would be so enthralled with Israel, except that was all wrong. And really fell in love with the country. And then my husband, Ron, he came over. So we were there for about 3 weeks and loved every minute of it. And it really is someplace I'd love to go back again to. So that was it. Excellent.
And Deb Mayton, how about yourself?
I don't have much of a voice tonight. Gates Mayton. I've only been to Israel once, and it was a very, very, very long time ago. I was 17. We went as a family, and my younger brother it was his bar mitzvah year, and he and I read Torah on Mount Masada on that trip. I would love to go back at some point. I don't have a romantic story, but 2 of my sons each have a friend who met their current spouse on Birthright. So
fantastic. And it used to be that Birthright would pay for your honeymoon to go back to Israel. I don't know if that's still true.
Yeah, I don't think they do that.
They wanted to go to Fiji or wherever instead. Fair enough. Toby, how about yourself?
Well, I went to Israel 10 years ago on Rabbi Eric's trip, and I went with my daughter. And I think my most memorable and in some ways loving moment was we were on the top of that first hotel we stayed in. I can't remember the name of it. It had the mall in the back.
Yeah, Mamilla.
And it was sunset. And you looked over the old city, and it was magical, and it was gold. And it was a place, I think, that I fell in love with that part of Israel.
Fantastic. Anne, how about yourself?
I've been to Israel many years ago, back in the middle 70s. I went with my late husband, and we had wonderful times there. And I've been a member of Share Me a little over 20 years. There really isn't that much more. I mean, I would like to go back eventually sometime, but not at the present, but maybe soon.
You got it.
But whatever.
You got it. Steve, how about yourself?
The last time Debbie and I were in Israel, I'm Steve Rosenberg. The last time Debbie and I were in Israel was in November of 18. We were there for my nephew's son's bar mitzvah. I wasn't in Jerusalem. We were in Arad, which is the south near the desert, which is near the firing line, so to speak. But, we loved everything about it. It was one of those Orthodox bar mitzvahs where everybody brings their own container of Pepsi. They had about 350 people. So we had a great time. And every time we are in Israel, we like it more and more.
Fantastic. And Sarah, how about yourself?
So I have actually never been, but I do have an Israel love story. My cousin actually met her husband on a kibbutz, and they have 2 children.
Very nice. Well, we hope you'll have the chance to get there in the not too distant future. And just so everybody does know, literally about a year from now, in December of 2023, Shir Me is planning to go as a congregation, and we would love for anybody and everybody to go with us. Rabbi is working on all of those details, and I am sure sooner rather than later, those details will come out to everybody. And I advocate for going as many times in your life as you possibly can. For me, just one thing I left out before, and then we'll get to a little bit of what Kobe talked about. When I go in December with our teenagers, first of all, and Fern Levy, first of all, amazing. 25 of our teens are going, which is great. And it's going to be a great experience for them. It will be, I counted this up, I think it'll be my 10th time in Israel. Steve, you may be the only one who has gone more than I have, but it is a wonderful opportunity to go as many, many times as you possibly can. I am going to share my screen with you now just for a minute. And you're going to see, this is what you are going to be able to, sorry, I got to move this up to the top. This is what you're going to be able to get when you log in to the website that I am going to give you that access to tomorrow. We are not going to be doing all of these classes during the year, but as you can see on the second line down, at least as it appears on my computer, we have Modern Love Stories of Jerusalem 1, 2, and 3. We'll be doing some other ones as well throughout the year. One of the things that I have learned, so I'm just going to let you know as you're watching your screen, is that if I try to make this full screen and share it with you, it will not let me share it with you. However, if I do what I believe is picture in picture, I will be able to share it with you. So what I'm going to ask is I'm only going to be playing parts of these as we go. Picture in picture will fill up part of the screen, but not all of the screen. And I just would ask you to listen a little bit to Kobe. I'll stop it along the way and then skip around. Each one of the parts of the Modern Love Stories has 3 or 4 love stories within it. So 10 to 12 love stories total. We're going to be talking about some of them and then some specific connections that are worth really learning about, I think at least. So what I'm going to try to do is hit the picture in picture and make this as big as I can on my screen, which might be what I got here. I'm sorry if it's small, but at the very least, you'll be able to hear it. And I'm going to let this play for just a little bit.
Souls, sites, and subjects, which tour guides hardly ever get to talk about, which the average visitor would never encounter. This is session 2, Modern Love Stories of Jerusalem. Our previous session looked at ancient love stories in the city. As in the previous section, there will be an introduction to each story, which includes the couple's names, the dates they lived, the name of the site I'm filming at, and some pictures of the couple as well as other photos related to their story. Our last session ended with Suleiman the Magnificent, who built the current walls of Jerusalem, and Roxolana, who supposedly urged him to do so. As such, to kick off our next session, it's only appropriate that we begin with the couple who led the initiative to expand Jerusalem outside of her walls. I'm talking, of course, about Moses and Judith Matspuri. I'll be filming, however, not in the first neighborhood outside of the walls, Mishkenot Sha'ananim, with the famous windmills shown here, but in land purchased at the same time, which would later house the neighborhood next door, but built 30 years later, known as Yemin Moshe.
Is anybody else having trouble seeing any video?
There is no video.
Interesting, because I see a video, but well, it's a picture at the moment. But in a moment, Kobe's going to actually be appearing on video. So let's see if that's what you guys see.
I don't see a picture at all. A picture in a picture, they're blank.
That's what I have. That's what I have.
Okay, sorry. Let me try something then. I'm not sure why it won't let me share this. Hold on. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. Okay. In the meantime, I want to make sure you at the very least can watch it tomorrow. What I'm going to do though is share my screen for a little bit, and you'll be able to see, or you'll at least be able to hear Kobe from a distance. And I know the picture is going to be very small, but I'm trying to see, you know what I might be able to do? Let's try something here. I wonder if I zoom in far enough, if it will look. Let me do it like this.
It's a little better.
Yeah, no, it should get a little better. So we're going to be focusing on where it says Moses Montefiore and Judith Cohen. All right, let me just try this. Is that bigger on your screen where they are? Where it says
yeah.
Yes.
All right, so I'm now going to try to hit play and let us hope for the best.
Judith Cohen and Moses Montefiore met by shidduch, or arranged Jewish marriage, between two wealthy and famous families, one Ashkenazi and one Sephardi.
Before we go any further, has anybody ever in their family had arranged marriage, or I know the answer to this is probably no, anybody been involved in an arranged marriage in life?
No.
Okay. And everybody
in my family, yes. Me, no.
Okay. So for
and
those
not in a long time.
Okay. For those who don't know, obviously still many people in the traditional Jewish world will go through what's called shidduch or shidduch, which is the families will choose who you're going to get married to. It is actually something that still happens very much in the modern world, in the traditional Jewish world today. And I will ask the question that I always ask, by a show of hands, how many people here, I know you're all adults, would have allowed your parents to choose the person you were going to get married to? That is a solid 0. How many of you would have liked to be involved in the choosing process for your own children to have found their spouses if they are married?
No.
Also a 0. That's a rarity. Usually we get more in that boat. People are happy to be involved in that. But what happens here in the story of Moses Montefiore and Judith Cohen is we have what in the Jewish world is called a mixed marriage, Sephardic and Ashkenazic. Just as a quick reminder, Ashkenazic, all of those Jews who come from a background that would be Eastern Europe, Poland, Russia, etc. Sephardic, those who come from the world of Spain, Portugal, Morocco, Iran, Iraq, Italy, that part of the world. So we are going to talk, or Kobe's going to talk in just a minute about where Moses Montefiore comes from. And it will be very interesting because I'm going to share one particular fact with you about where he comes from.
This was a mixed marriage in the day. The Montefiore family came from the Spanish expulsion to Italy in a town called Livorno. The name Montefiore means mountain of flowers, hence my choice of this locale here. Moses' grandfather had come to London in the mid-18th century, but Moses himself was actually born back in Livorno during a family trip.
Does anyone know what distinction, it's not literally in Livorno, but it's close. Does anybody know what distinction, as far as the Jewish world goes, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, that Italy happens to hold, that is one that we usually don't think of as it being something connected to Italy. We think of it more as being connected to Europe, but it's totally true. What I'm going to tell her, Eastern Europe. Anybody want to take a guess at what Italy holds? It's not a very wonderful distinction in the Jewish world. I will just tell you that Italy is the home, was the home of the first ever Jewish ghetto. All the way back, like in the 1600s, Italy was the first place that cordoned off, what do you want to say? A Jewish part of town. Alan.
Wasn't there at least one famous rabbi from Italy?
Well, there's many. So the one they always talk about, I think, is usually Sforno. we used to joke in rabbinic school, like he was the guy that made it. Like he was in every commentary. So you just said, oh, Sforno, like from 14th century Italy, you know, that guy. So, but he's one of the, but there was a large Jewish, or all things being equal, large Jewish population in Italy. It's not so far to imagine how that could have happened. But here we go, a little more of their story.
Moshe, meanwhile, was a bohemian and a bon vivant. He was not as interested in his studies as he was doing well in the London Stock Exchange, where he ended up becoming one of the 12 Jewish stockbrokers. He also started a military career and business and politics and science. His personality, success, and connections made him quite friendly with Princess Victoria. She even knighted him. In 1812, at the age of 27, he was married to Judith. This Tarzan playboy who did not really care about keeping the Jewish commandments, the mitzvot, was suddenly under the wedding canopy, the chuppah, with an older woman. Okay, by 9 months, physically challenged, ritually observant, and Ashkenazi.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a very important question, and please remember that you're being recorded for this. All right, that's my little joke. So Moses Montefiore, Sephardic, coming from Italy, not so observant, didn't want to be so ritually observant, enjoyed business more than Talmud, let's say. And his wife, Judith, Ashkenazic, traditional, ritually observant, and here they are underneath the chuppah. So I'm going to ask a question. In your life, whether you were married, are married, whatever it may be, if you think of your own children's future or wherever they are, what happens when you don't always see things the same way as your spouse? Who wins in your amazingly wonderful relationships that you've had in life? Anyone can volunteer, whatever they would like to say. Or how did you work that out? Go. I'm sorry, Toby, go ahead.
I said I won most of the time.
Okay. Most of the time, Toby is our victor in her situation.
There's no winning.
Steve says there is no winning.
There's just compromising.
Okay, there's compromising. Very good.
Because if you win one battle, you may lose the war.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I will just say, I think this is a classic example. I will share, people know my parents, but I will just share a particular story that is somewhat similar to this one. My parents both grew up in Philadelphia, so it's not like one came from Ashkenazic and Sephardic. They're both of Ashkenazic background. But my mom grew up in a very observant family. In fact, she did not become bat mitzvah until as an adult at Shirami. My father grew up in a very non-observant family, and he is the youngest of two brothers. And I think one of those families that kind of on the way out the door of him becoming bar mitzvah said, thank you. We've had a wonderful time at the synagogue. We'll see you when we see you. And interestingly enough, I think it would be fair to say that my mom kind of brought my dad back into, let's call it, the Jewish world and being involved in Jewish life in a way that was different than perhaps if he had met somebody else. So I think the story of Moses Montefiore and Judith Cohen is not so different perhaps than some of us who are sitting here, than some of us who can think of our own parents or aunts or uncles or our children or whoever it may be. And the fact that sometimes when we have two people of different backgrounds, whether that's observance or their background of, a kind of where their families come from, as Steve said, they work it out. Or as Toby said, usually the wife does okay in the end. I think either of those statements would be fair statements. So I'm going to share my screen one more time because I want to just skip ahead a little bit. You again will have the chance to listen if you would like. I'm going to just skip over to about here.
She had felt a deep connection with her as they were both without children. And Moses immediately gave funds to fix up the site. In 1860, he bought the land in which I'm sitting now, which they called Herem Moshe v'Yehudit, Moshe and Yehudit, the Hebrew names. Herem, vineyard. 2 years later, Yehudit would pass away, and she was buried in the family plot in London. He, however, lived on another 23 years. In the meantime, not long after he bought the land, the first neighborhood outside the city walls would be built just across a little walkway over here. It's often confused with this one, which is called Yamin Moshe, the right hand of Moses. Not Moses the lawgiver, but Moses Montefiore. Actually, one of 5 neighborhoods in Jerusalem named after him. His 100th birthday was celebrated in Jewish communities around the world, and his seat at the Bevis Mark Synagogue in London is roped off to this very day.
So Moses Montefiore lives much longer than Judith does, and their life finds them back in England at a certain point. It is, Kobe just mentioned that the Bevis Mark Synagogue is where Moses Montefiore's seat is still roped off. So just to give you a picture, this is the Bevis Mark Synagogue in London, okay? What do you notice that's different than perhaps the synagogue at Shirami, the sanctuary at Shirami? Feel free to just say it out loud.
It's a Sephardic synagogue, isn't it?
It is definitely a Sephardic synagogue. Does anyone know how you know that is true?
The beam is in the center.
Right. So the bima here, where the reader, whether it's Torah or otherwise, is reading from the center. Correct. Okay. One of the other things that I don't want to say tips this off as a Sephardic synagogue, but just as a note about the synagogue itself, is all things being equal, this was a more traditional synagogue than Shirami in terms of practice, right? My guess would be at a certain point, this was renovated, but at a certain point, upstairs might have been for the women and downstairs for the men, okay, type of thing, okay? I will say one last thing about this, and then we're going to go to a different story, which is, if it is true, as we talked about, that, people have to compromise along the way. If you remember, Moses Montefiore, Sephardic, Judith Cohen, Ashkenazic. So even though Moses was not particularly observant, and even though he didn't spend his days studying Talmud and all those kind of things, they ended up being very involved in the Sephardic world of Judaism. So he did all right for himself, or his family, I guess you could say, did all right for themselves on the Jewish end of things. I will just tell you that without Moses Montefiore and without Judith Cohen, the first neighborhoods outside of Jerusalem would not exist today. And when they first started, they were places nobody wanted to go. They literally gave that land away for free. Just go outside of the city walls, because if you remember, if you're inside the city walls, you have things like public services, protection from people coming from the outside, all the things you can imagine. And today, that neighborhood that Kobe is sitting in has some of the most expensive homes in Jerusalem, because you're looking at the old city when you're looking out your window. So if whoever held on to their land, they did pretty well. We're going to see.
What kind of physical disability did Judith Cohen have?
You know what? I have to look into that, but I will definitely check for sure. I don't actually know the answer to that, but I will check for you. Definitely. I am going to skip ahead to our next story. So I'm just going to go back a little bit. I have to do this with kind of dragging things along the way. Here we go.
A scoundrel and a pristine, pure soul.
So
pictured here is the inside of
the screen.
I know. The next story, sorry, I was just moving my mouse. The next story is Moses Shapira and Rosette Jokel, one of whom was a really great, wonderful, amazing person. The other one, not so much. So let's figure it out.
Near where the story begins, but not where I'm filming, and a supposed secret scroll, which led to the story's dramatic finish.
In the year 1840, there was a lot of messianic fervor, people believing the Messiah was coming to Jerusalem. One man named Nathanael Shapira of Kamenetsk-Podolsky in Ukraine set out for Jerusalem, but never quite made it there. Neither did the Messiah, in case you were wondering.
However, major changes were afoot at this time in the Ottoman Empire. The relaxing of rules on minorities and churches were able to be constructed, including what is today's Christ Church, the first Protestant church in the Middle East, just inside Jaffa Gate. 15 years later, 1855, Nathanael's son, Moshe Shapira, then aged 25, came to Jerusalem looking for his lost father. He didn't find him either, but he did find hot soup, warm bread, and caretakers at the church, which had been specifically set up to convert the Jewish population. Shapir, however, had already converted to Christianity en route, adding the name Wilhelm while in Prussia. The church, meanwhile, had been involved in proto-archaeology in the land of Israel, and this appealed very much to Shapir. One morning, he was out in the area of what would be the city of David, back then called Kfar Shiloh, the Siloam village. On his way back with the milk, as he was climbing up the slope from the valley of Hinnom,
I just want to share one thing about that valley of Gehinnom that Kobe just spoke about. We know that in Jewish tradition, there's no such thing as hell, okay? But the valley of Gehinnom is supposed to be the place where there is kind of like I don't want to say a portal, but some type of area where you can enter or somehow be sucked into, where all the bad people go to. Now, if you went there to Jerusalem today and went to the Valley of Gehinnom, you would find people kicking soccer balls around or throwing the frisbee or whatever it might be. But just know that there is this place just outside of the old city, just in a valley that kind of is right there, that is supposed to be one of the places where, if you're not so great after life is over, you'll find yourself, which hopefully none of us will find. But here's the continuation of the story of Moses Shapira and Rosa Choco.
And fell into a giant puddle. His clothes were soaked. The milk was spilled. He arrived wounded, wet, shivering, cold, and was sent to a hospital run by the nuns behind the church. Today, part of a different church of the Maronite Christians from Lebanon. The hospital, meanwhile, was run by a woman named Charlotte Hills, a very serious, strict, and stern woman. Bleeding and hallucinating through the midst of his illness, Shapira saw a white angel sitting on the edge of his bed and looking at him with concern and compassion. It was the nurse Rosette, the niece of the founder of the Order of Deaconesses. She helped him get warm and kissed his forehead at the exact moment that Charlotte walked into the room and her jaw dropped and her eyes bugged out of her head. Rosette's heart sank like a Jerusalem stone, but Shapira felt better than he had ever felt in his life. For that little kiss on the forehead, the two of them were immediately brought to formalize their relationship and get married.
I mean, who's ever fallen in love with a nurse? I mean, honestly, has that ever happened? Has that ever happened?
They were a weird couple. Amazingly, they just didn't get along. And the relationship became complicated and painful. He opened up a souvenir shop on what is today called Christian Quarter Road, number 76 today, as well as the shops on either side. But he soon realized he could make much more money by selling fake antiquities to unsuspecting tourists. Not much has changed today. After one particularly lucrative sale, he was able to buy the home which we are sitting now, just behind me. This home, however, is better known as the Anatijo House, after a later resident and well-known painter. It's actually now part of the Israel Museum. However, the wonderful Dairy Cafe, which used to sit right outside here, and inside, and where I had my post-wedding brunch, unfortunately was a casualty of Corona. Rosette, meanwhile, had grown up in a convent and thought that what he was doing, Moses Wilhelm Shapira, was creating idols. When he was finally found out, she realized that he wasn't an idolater. And then it dawned on her that No, he was just a cheat and a liar, a giant one at that. Shapiro, however, doubled down and claimed that he had the original scroll of Deuteronomy, including an 11th commandment. Don't hate your brother in your hearts. Though it said nothing about a husband. And he actually tried to sell this scroll to the British Museum, but was caught. His name sullied, his business destroyed. He ended up committing suicide in a hotel in Rotterdam. In this case, Rosette definitely had a reason to cry over spilled milk.
So I know it is hard to believe that we could have a dishonest Jewish business person, but here we do in this story have one who decided to try to sell fake antiquities into to unsuspecting folks. And I don't know if anybody here has ever been to a certain part of Jerusalem, but if you go there, there's the, what do you want to call it? The souvenir shops, so to speak, along the way, that you too can still buy many fake antiquities for prices that are probably way too high. So not one of our best, most wonderful humans, but sometimes when you get kissed by a nurse, love just happens. I'm going to share one more story with you, and I want to let you know that this involves many, many, many people, and then a very special person at the end. And then I'm going to share two more stories, this and one other story for our day. And what the last part of the story is something very personal to me. So these people you might know a little bit, Nathan and Lena Strauss, Isidore and Ida Strauss. You may know them from their real life, and you may know them from the movies. So here we go.
There's 3 stories for the price of 1. In the early 20th century, the Strauss family came from Germany to the United States to pursue the American dream, and they did very well. They owned 2 huge department stores, Macy's and A&O Strauss.
So these are the people that founded Macy's. They did all right for themselves, the Strauss family.
Nathan Strauss ended up marrying Lena, and later on in life, in 1912, they visited the land of Israel. They came specifically to Zichron Yaakov to visit his friend Aaron Aronson, a leading Zionist and agronomist. Aaron Aronson was the one who actually discovered wild wheat. And he came to talk to him about agriculture. But Nathan wasn't feeling well, and the doctor saw him and told him, mita o meta, which means bed, rest, or death. You think the story is about Nathan and Lena, but it's not. Because joining him on that trip were his brother Isidore and his wife Ida. They, at some point, end up telling Nathan, listen, you know, how many moshavot, Jewish agricultural settlements, and yeshivot, study centers, can you see, right? It's getting repetitive. I think we're done here. And Nathan, who was a much bigger Zionist, said to Isidore, he says, can't you see what these guys are up against? What they're trying to pull off here? They don't just need our money. They need people with vision, with connections, to make things happen. And Isidore says, no, that's great, but again, I think we're done. And he and his wife, Ida, end up going back to Europe. When Nathan is a bit better, they start to go around the country. But they end up receiving a telegram from Isidore and Ida saying, you got to get back to Europe. You're going to miss the last boat of the season to get back to America. But alas, they don't make it on time. Isidore and Ida got on the boat, and they wish they hadn't, because that boat, in 1912, was none other than the Titanic. Ida Strauss was the only first-class woman to die on the Titanic.
So I'm going to ask you a question before Kobe gives you the answer. Why do you think Ida Strauss was the only woman who was traveling in first class to die on the Titanic?
Because she wouldn't leave her husband.
All right, maybe the love was so strong that they had forged that she wouldn't leave him, and that the he wasn't going to leave, so she wasn't going to leave. Anybody else?
she was caught up in some elaborate scheme regarding a necklace and some love that she found at the front of the ship.
Could have been. Could have been. I mean, you know, we've seen the movie. You never know. You never know. So let's figure out. Let's learn from Kobe why she was the only first woman in first class to not make it.
She should have been saved, but Isidore, while not being so Zionist, was very chivalrous, and he refused to get on a lifeboat, which there were not enough, unless all the women and children, even the ones in the lower classes, steerage, etc., were taken care of first. Ida refused to leave his side, and as such, they both are going to perish on the Titanic. If you've seen the movie, they actually appear in the movie, the very well-dressed older couple lying in bed as the waves crash over them.
So she didn't make it off because he would not leave unless every woman and child got off first, and she wouldn't leave him. Now, I'm not going to ask if any of us would do the same, but I hope we would. I would rather just turn for a minute to the name that's on top of the building where Kobe is at the moment. How many people here, maybe even you are a member, how many people here know what Hadassah is in, you know, kind of worldwide? Okay, raise your hand if you do. Okay, anybody here a member of Hadassah? You can be even if you're a male. It's totally fine. Hadassah is a worldwide organization dedicated to health and education and welfare of all people. It was founded, so to speak, by a woman named Henrietta Zold. And their name, Hadassah, comes from, for those of us who know, in the scroll of Esther, in Megillat Esther, it says that Esther's Hebrew name is Hadassah. There's some question about that, but let's just assume that is true for now. Henrietta Zold, one of the most beautiful stories, which starts off as a not so beautiful story, is although Henrietta Zold dedicated her entire life to the health and education and welfare of human beings around the world, especially children, especially women, she never married. And one of the things she was quoted as saying, one of the things she was interviewed and answered a question was that if she had the opportunity, she would have traded everything in her life to have just had a child. And it's kind of this very bittersweet thing in the sense that she did so much to make the world a better place. So I will just tell you that shortly after Tu B'Shvat, which is the 15th of Shvat on the Jewish calendar, and usually in January or February on our calendar, 15 days later on the 30th of Shvat is the anniversary of Henrietta Zold's death. And Henrietta Zold, having no children of her own and always wanting to have a child, when this occurred, the Israeli government made a decision that the 30th of Shvat, the anniversary, the yortzeit of her passing, is Mother's Day in Israel. And the rationale for it was she may never have had her own biological children, but that she literally gave birth to the nation in a certain way of Israel. And so for those who don't know, right about now, as of 2021, 2022, the last time they took a census, there are 9.5 or so million people who live in Israel. So the idea behind it is that Henrietta Zold never had zero, let's use a number, biological children of her own, but has over 9 million children because of what she did to make Israel the way it is today and kind of gave birth in a certain way to the nation. So it's a wonderful way to mark, by making it Mother's Day, to mark a day that for a woman who has done so much for the Jewish community. The next story that I'm going to talk about is another person that we may know very, very well. Anybody here remember those old dictionaries you used to get from like the Jewish dictionary that probably has fallen apart in your house somewhere? Does anybody remember the name of that dictionary? We all had it. It was this I'd have it on the shelf over here somewhere. It was usually something like Ben Yehuda's dictionary. Okay. And Ben Yehuda is a guy we're going to meet in just a minute here. But his name is Eliezer Ben Yehuda, and we're going to meet the wonderful women that he married. And this is very modern. He was alive at the beginning of the state of Israel, and without him, there would not be modern Hebrew. It just wouldn't exist. So Eliezer ben Yehuda, whose street we get to hang out on Shabbat, at Motzei Shabbat, after Shabbat is ended in Jerusalem, that many of us know, is the next of our love stories. And he, in a perhaps for us in this day and age, shocking turn of events, decided to marry two different sisters. So let's learn about him.
Remember that biblical injunction we talked about last session against marrying two sisters? It's okay if you don't. Eliezer ben Yehuda, the father of modern Hebrew, apparently forgot about it as well. Okay, fine, they weren't all married at the same time. But still, at the least, I hope he created a Hebrew word to describe his, let's say, unique situation.
I'm back here on Ethiopia Street again, in fact, directly across from the Ethiopian church. But I'm not here to talk about the church again. I'm here because this is the home of none other than Eliezer Yitzhak Perelman. You've never heard of Eliezer Yitzhak Perelman? Maybe you know his name better to be Eliezer ben Yehuda. And if you don't remember him, you might at least remember Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, or perhaps in Tel Aviv. He was born in Russia, actually today's Belarus, and made Aliyah and moved to the land of Israel in 1881. And he came to Jerusalem at a time when no Zionists were coming here. This was just a holy city of ultra-Orthodox Haredi Jews. He made reviving Hebrew as his life mission. We're going to have a national home. We need a national language. And what language is a Jew from Yemen and a Jew from Germany or a Jew from Russia going to converse in? He decided it was time to revive Hebrew. He had a newspaper, and he would work on a dictionary and publish the new vocabulary words in his newspaper every week for the entire land to learn. This, however, was anathematic to the Haredi or ultra-Orthodox Jewish world, where the vast majority of them did not like this idea. They wanted to keep Hebrew as a language for prayer and holy matters. And so it got him into a few fights along with his neighbors. And I mean, they really were his neighbors, because right down the road over here is Mea Sharu, right down the street where the cars are at the end is the entrance to that famous Haredi ultra-Orthodox neighborhood. And he lived right nearby between them and the center of town. And like I said, he didn't get along so well with them. So there's this great story of a Haredi woman running down the road from my left, running down the road over here towards my right, to where the hospital is. And she stopped right here below his balcony. And she yelled out, in Yiddish, "Oy gewalt, it hurts." She was clearly already in labor. And he came out to the balcony above me and yelled, "Please yell in Hebrew." Doesn't get along so well with them. There is a really funny story tour guides would tell about the sign that was on the wall over there. A sign telling that this is the home of Eliezer ben Yehuda. And they would say that the sign would keep going missing all the time. And tour guides would explain that, of course, the Haredim down the street would take it down because they weren't big fans of his. But one time, somebody actually bothered to ask his daughter, who lived here, and I believe until her death about a decade or so ago. And she said, "No, I take it down. I don't want all these tourists hanging outside my house." There's another story of hers, which is that one time, Eliezer ben Yehuda's grave on the Mount of Olives had been defaced. And a news crew came here, woke her up at 7 a.m, and explained to her what had happened and asked if she'd like to go with them to the cemetery to see it. She said, sure. Right, they get there, they go over to the cemetery, and she sees what's written there. The cameras start to roll. They all expect to see, this poor distraught old lady crying about what had happened to her father's grave. And the opposite happens. She begins to laugh uncontrollably. They had written horrible, disgusting things right on it, and she's laughing uncontrollably. And you might be able to figure out why. Because they wrote it in Hebrew. And she was laughing because she said, look, he won. They're cursing him, but they're doing it in Hebrew.
So that is the story a little bit at the beginning of the life of Eliezer ben Yehuda. I will go to tell you that he married one sister. That sister unfortunately passed away. They had had children. And he fell in love with her sister. Now, their family was not so excited about this, but they ended up getting married, not the least of which was because Eliezer ben Yehuda was way older than the younger sister. What do they call that today? The May-December romance, to use a good term. But I will tell you a totally true story that happened in the 1900s here in beautiful Philadelphia that is connected to my own family in a very serious way. And you can decide, or perhaps you've had your own family stories like this. I'll call this the love story that Jerry Springer wrote. And I'll explain why in just a minute. My mother and her sister obviously had their parents, my grandparents. My grandmother I knew very well. She lived until I went to, actually I was at college orientation. So she lived into my teenage years. My grandfather, who, my mother's father, passed away when my mom was very young, like before the age of 10. So obviously I never knew him. And my middle name that's who I am named after. I don't know if you know this injunction in the Torah. When they say that one's a mitzvah, here's a mitzvah you probably don't know. His brother, my mother's father's name is Sam. His brother Isidore, Izzy, was never married. And in the Torah, there is an injunction that if a brother is not married and has never had children, he is supposed to, and his brother has passed away, the brother is supposed to ask his brother's wife, or now widow, to marry him. So I'm just going to ask you to ponder that for a minute in your own family's life story. Think of your amazing brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws, and if you have them, and, ponder, could you even possibly be married to that person? Just ponder it for a moment. But in my family, it so happened that my grandfather's brother, Izzy, asked my grandmother to marry him. And she said yes. So I have a very similar story to the one here, but I do want to tell you why this is kind of like the love story that Jerry Springer wrote. This, what I'm about to tell you, is in the Torah. A woman in the Torah does not need to agree to marry her the husband who has passed away's brother. But how is she supposed to tell him no? On the one hand, we could be nice and civil about it and just say, thank you, but no thank you, or you're wonderful, but I'll pass. But the Torah says she must do two things. One, spit on the ground. Two, take her shoe and fire it past him. And then he will know that the answer is no. And that is the Jerry Springer factor of when you can say no to someone who's going to get married to a brother or a sister. But I do want to let you know that my mother's, for the sake of argument, stepfather, even though she would call him dad also passed away before I was born, 6 months before I was born. And those are the two people that I'm named after. And in my world, it kind of ties into this particular love story. I am just going to tell you about one more story, and then we will have the opportunity, as I said, tomorrow to get this information, and you can watch it by yourself. I am going to just show you a picture of the people who are here, Mayor Feinstein and Rachel Kramer. Regardless of their story, which is amazing, and I hope that you will take the opportunity to read it, you might be able to see that Kobe is filming from the Museum of Underground Prisoners. Mayor Feinstein was one of the very active in the Jewish underground at the time of Jerusalem's or Israel's birth, let's call it. One of the things that is noted in that story is that 90% of people who came to Israel just after the Holocaust had lost a first-degree relative in the Shoah. And their story is tied into that, but I'm going to ask you a question that I think is really powerful. There are hundreds probably of museums in Israel. Anyone here want to take a guess as to why Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum, is one of the last ones that was built in Jerusalem? One might think it would be one of the first. People had just, survived, if they had survived or lost. 90% of people had lost a first-degree relative, meaning a mom or a dad or a brother or a sister, spouse, whatever it might have been. Why was Yad Vashem one of the last built? Would anyone like to take a guess? Just unmute and go ahead.
People needed time to heal.
Maybe people needed time to heal. Steve, Debbie, what were you going to say?
I think the same thing. I mean, I can remember in like Hebrew high school starting to see all the movies about the Holocaust. And I think before, so that would have been in like the, I don't know, 70s maybe. And I think I felt like that was when people started, there was enough distance that people could start to talk about it.
Okay. Anybody else want to offer a suggestion?
Isn't it because they lacked a lot of information about the people?
Could be. Maybe they just didn't really know what was happening. We know that entire villages, entire towns, entire communities were wiped out. It's actually a relatively more practical answer, even though we don't think of that when we use that term often when we talk about the Shoah or the Holocaust. If literally hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people made Aliyah after the Shoah, they survived, or had family who also survived and they came and met them. Do you need to have a museum if you can walk down the hallway and talk to the guy on 3B because he survived? Do you need a museum if you can go down to the corner coffee shop and talk to the woman who's now behind the counter or sitting there, selling her whatever she's selling at the store if she survived? The answer is no. And so they decided not to build it until it was a little more distant, but not because of the memories, but distant because you just could talk to the person next door. They would tell you, if they wanted to, what happened. You didn't need to go too far. And so there were other museums and infrastructure and things that people felt needed to be built first. So I want to just say one particular last thing before we go on our way. And then if you have any questions, there is an amazing story that Kobe talks about in the second part that deals with a man named Hamar and a woman named Leah and a third guy named Valero, because of course there has to be a Valero. It's a love triangle unlike any other. But I do want to just say one thing that is amazing about that particular story, which is that Hamar is actually related to Eliezer ben Yehuda, who we just met, and he has control of the newspaper. So talking about how far someone would go for love, it was kind of like a forbidden love between him and Leah. Leah's parents wanted her to marry Valero, who was the rich, playboyish kind of guy. And every day in the newspaper, Hamar would write a love letter to Leah. In his news that went to everybody in the whole town, telling her how much he loved her and how much he should marry her. So one of the things that I would love for us to say no, to think about, no pun intended, or to remember, is that with our modern love stories of Jerusalem, not only should we continue to love Jerusalem and keep Jerusalem in our hearts and see it as a place that's very important, but remind those around us who we truly love that we love them every day. You don't have to put it in the newspaper because no one reads a newspaper anymore. You don't have to put it on social media or anywhere else, but just let the people you know that you love them every day. Because in this day and age, unfortunately, we have seen, many of us who are on this screen, many of us who have had experiences with each other, know that we don't know how long we have with anybody. And for us to be able to share the ability of love with each other is something that's really important, whether it's in Jerusalem, halfway around the world, or in Newtown, Holland, Richboro, wherever we happen to live. So I just want to say thank you for spending this time with me. Hopefully you'll now go get to spend some time with the people you love. In my case, I'm going to get to spend some time with Jay. I think Jerry's also at a meeting, watching something we love very much, maybe some wrestling or some NFL. I missed that over the time that he was away. but hopefully you will get the opportunity to do the same. So thank you so much for spending time with us this evening. And if you have any questions or thoughts, please feel free to share them. And if not, we will head on our way.
Yashikar.
Thank you.